kind of like a bit of, because that's kind of like your audience point there, that's your eye contact, as it were. And, you know, but keep it casual, you know, you don't need to be kind of like staring them down at all times, you know, it doesn't need to be...
Prime Minister's address.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, we're not doing a Shakespearean monologue here, we're not trying to freak people out.
Hello, I'm Gary Ross. I'm the distillery's ambassador for John Dewars Sons. So I'm based here at the beautiful Dewars Aberfeldy Distillery. We actually cover brand visits to all 5 of our amazing distilleries across Scotland. Right now we're tucked away in the back of our on-site heritage museum at the Dewars Aberfeldy Distillery. So the best place to kick off a tour at Aberfeldy really is to understand why it's here and why we call ourselves Dewars Aberfeldy. There's no such thing as a Dewars Aberfeldy whisky. We make Aberfeldy, and that's part of the Dewars blend. So that's really the place you need to start when you talk about Aberfeldy, because it's so intrinsically linked that you can't talk about one without mentioning the other. So a kind of potted history as to why Aberfeldy, I guess, is the best place to start. So John Dewars Sons, believe it or not, was founded by someone called John Dewar. He was born local to Aberfeldy in about 1805. About 3 miles from where the distillery is today in the parish of Dull. As it sounds, not an overly interesting place, to be honest. Probably the most interesting thing about it is if you drive past it, it proudly states that it's paired with a town called Boring in Oregon in the US. And there's actually a third town trying to get in the act called Bland in New South Wales, Australia. So probably my favourite fact to learn across the weird 2 years we've had with lockdowns and all the rest of it is that collectively these 3 towns are known as the Trinity of Tedium. It's so unnecessary, but such a cool fact at the same time. And we always refer to John as being the least dull thing to come out of Dull. So he was the 7th of 9 kids that his parents had. Very different times in Scotland, didn't have Netflix and things back then. And the main reason people had big families is because it's almost subsistence living at that sort of time in Scotland. So working on the farm and the croft. So if you've got more kids, they can do the work, makes your life a little bit easier. Being one of the younger kids, had a little bit more free time. He actually did an apprenticeship locally as a joiner, but decided he didn't want to build houses for a living, so he upped sticks and he moved to Perth. He started working in his uncle's shop. He sold kind of all manner of things, but his focus really was on wines and spirits. And a couple of years later, in 1846, he decided to make a go of it himself and he opened his own shop at 111 High Street, Perth, John Dewars Wine and Spirits. And he sold pretty much anything and everything alcoholic. The main things he was known for, cognacs, brandies, sherry, and it's regarded in the papers as having an extensive list of porters. So he did sell some Scotch whisky as well, but at this point in time, on the whole, Scotch whisky was actually seen as a bit of an inferior product. But this all changed in about 1860 with the Gladstone Spirits Act, which meant you could basically mix the different types of whisky we make in Scotland, the malt whiskies and the grain whiskies together, and the resulting liquid would be a blend. A Scotch whisky, I should say. And John was an early pioneer in the art of blending, and he was very proud and passionate of the blends he was putting together. So much so, he's actually one of the first people in the industry to put his name on the bottle. He used to sign bottles as they left the shop, and that's why to this day, every bottle of Dewars, somewhere on it, will bear John's signature. Something we're very, very proud of, obviously. And I like to think because of the inherent quality that John was creating in his blends, we've got a very strong reputation locally. Within the area I'm sitting at the moment, Perthshire, so about 30 miles around the city of Perth. So from very humble beginnings, when he passed away in 1880, he left his family a business of today's value of about £2 million, which is pretty good going, to be honest. But we didn't really take off until 2 of his sons took the business forward. So just like his parents, he also had 9 kids. Busy times. And there's two of them that took the business forward. So we've got John Alexander Dewar, who was very much a chip off the old block, just like his dad, great financier, excellent businessman. He took on the role of the blender as well, so he pretty much ran the company. And a couple years later, his younger brother, Tommy Dewar, or Thomas, joined as well. He was very much the yin to John's yang. So John made all the money and Tommy blew it all on advertising and travel. He was like the original whiskey brand ambassador. Very famously in 1892, he embarked on a 2-year sales journey talking about and selling the family blends all around the world. One thing we don't often mention about that amazing trip, it did come at the cost of 2 years' profits. So he knew how to spend his money. It was hugely successful. And it's the main reason that today Dewars is so big internationally, especially in the States. And when Tommy came back from his incredible journey he'd been on, the brothers, they had to look to build a distillery to meet up, so they could meet the demand of what was coming in from these international orders. Because before this, it was a UK-based business. So initially what they did is they took on the lease of a distillery quite close to here called Auchnagee, which I love. It's got to be the most Scottish sounding distillery that's ever existed. That was about 10 miles from where I'm sitting at the moment. But very quickly it wasn't making enough whiskey. So they decided to purpose build a distillery here at Aberfeldy to intend on making a light, sweet and fruity whiskey which uses the base of the blends. In fact, on the desk in front of me we've got an illustration, a copy of that original distillery plan that we have. So I'm from Aberfeldy. Everything I say today will be incredibly biased, but it certainly has to be one of the most beautiful distilleries across Scotland, because unlike a lot of them that were kind of flattened and rebuilt in the 60s and 70s, it's still very true to that original Victorian design by Charles Doig. And in 2000, we decided to open this amazing visitor centre that we have here. And the space I'm in at the moment, this is a recreation of Tommy's study in Dewar House. So when he came back from spending all of our money travelling around the world, to then come back up to Perthshire, decided to spend even more money building our head office in London. And this is his study. And I think it reflects him as a character. You know, there's whiskey stuff everywhere. Whiskey was his life. But it was so much more than that. He was a collector of art and antiques. He loved pretty much anything and everything Scottish. He was a famed after-dinner speaker, published author. He had his fingers in many pies. And a dealer in art and antiques as well. But a lot of things that he'd purchased would eventually come back into Dewars in advertising. So Dewars historically were known for that weird and wacky advertising, but the quality of the whiskey has always been there as well, been well and truly awarded for the quality of the whiskey that we've always had. And to this day, we're actually the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey. But really we're here to talk about Aberfeldy today. And Aberfeldy exists mainly because at that point in time, the Dewars family didn't own a distillery. They were buying cask from local distilleries, blending it together, and that's what they're selling. So to ensure they had more control over their base product and their blends, they purpose-built the distillery we have here at Aberfeldy. And as someone that's from Aberfeldy, I'm very passionate and excited by the fact we actually have it available as a single malt in its own right nowadays. So we're now within the production at the Aberfeldy Distillery. We've almost kind of missed the first half because really we want to focus on where does the character of Aberfeldy come from. So we're not talking about malting, not talking about milling or mashing. For Aberfeldy, the character that we aim for, it really starts off in fermentation. So this is where we're actually creating all the flavour, and then throughout the process of distillation, we're selecting and refining what we want to keep and present as Aberfeldy. Now at Aberfeldy, we've got a slightly above average fermentation. The average in Scotland is maybe 60 to 65. At Aberfeldy it's a minimum of 72 hours. Now, fermentation time is what everyone really shouts about when it comes to Scottish whisky making in terms of fermentation. It's not technically correct because fermentation is actually done after about 48 hours. So what we're doing here is we're leaving it in for effectively an extra day. We're not getting more alcohol because we're doing that. It's all about flavour development. So the kind of buzzword for the day, we get a process happening we call esterification, which we're not going to get into. If you're interested, look it up. Very geeky, sciencey stuff I absolutely love. But to kind of simplify it, what's happening in this extra day that we leave it in here, alcohols and acids are effectively combining, creating extra compounds. So these give you fruity or floral characters. So like I mentioned just now, we tried the Aberfeldy 12, very fruity and floral, kind of grassy. This is where we're starting to create that character. So at the end of that fermentation process, what we have at Aberfeldy is a strong beer, 8.5, 8.7%. It's not the nicest of pints. We serve it at about 33 degrees. It's a little bit lumpy, so probably not the best pint. So what we do instead, we run it through these beautiful stills we have behind us here. At Aberfeldy, a nice simple distillation regime. One wash back into 2 wash stills, which then passes on for 2 spirit stills. What we're trying to do here is really refine the character of what we've already created. So we're actually making flavour through distillation. We're refining it, selecting what we want to present as Aberfeldy, and get rid of those undesirable flavour congeners. As well as obviously boost that ABV up to about 70% when it comes off the stills, which is pretty good stuff. So a classic double distillation we have here at Aberfeldy. The biggest thing to note when it comes to our distillation, our stills, very tall, quite narrow as well. Not the biggest by any means, but we have a lot of copper contact, a lot of reflux, and when it comes on to collecting the heart of the run, we dial the steam back as well. We bring it in very, very slowly. So tall stills, narrow stills, running them very slowly, what we end up getting is a very, very light, refined, delicate and sweet style of new make spirit. So we've had some other whiskies like our Aberfeldy Distillery, for example. The still's much shorter and wider, much less interaction with the copper. The reason this is important, the copper acts as a catalyst for removing heavy flavour congeners like sulphur. By removing loads and loads of those here at Aberfeldy, you get this lovely light, grassy style of whisky, which after maturation, extracting those sweet wood flavours, we get this lovely honey character that we're known for here at Aberfeldy. So I always like to think that Scotch whisky is actually quite a green industry. You know, all the things that we have that we aren't using, we refer to as co-products, from the draft, the pot ale. These have other uses. The only real waste we have is heat. There's a lot of heat required for making whisky, through the distillation, through the mashing. How you create that heat is varying greatly across different sites across Scotland. Now, a lot of companies, well, pretty much all of them to be honest, will use steam because it's an easier thing to control than like a direct flame that some distilleries still use to this day. But steam comes from many different sources. Most distilleries use HFO, heavy fuel oil. But here at Aberfeldy in 2015 we put in a biomass burner. So it is behind me. Unfortunately when they put it in they didn't think about tours because they put the business end at the wrong side. It's kind of when you go to a zoo, there's a tiger there but you don't see it. So it's the red bit at the back of this room. What we're doing instead of using this heavy fuel oil now is we're taking compressed sawdust, basically, it's waste from the forestry industry, and we're burning this on site to create that steam energy. So by doing this, we've reduced roughly by about 7,000 tonnes of CO2 being released from the site, which is roughly around about 90% reduction in the total carbon footprint of our Aberfeldy distillery. So I like to jokingly say if you drink Aberfeldy, you're doing your bit to save the planet. Obviously, this is going to get repaired at some point, but we want to keep making our whisky. So we do have a secondary burner as well. That was the HFO until quite recently. We've just switched that up now to operate on flow gas, which is much greener. But our plan is, once it becomes more available for us up here in the Highlands, because we're literally in the middle of nowhere, we're going to move on to biogas. So all of our distilleries, not just Aberfeldy, we're constantly changing and evolving what we do to become more sustainable in the long term for creating Scotch whisky in the future in a greener manner. This is our warehouse bar, so it's basically hidden somewhere in our warehouse. I couldn't possibly tell you where. But all of our kind of invited guests or kind of special events that we have on, we get to come in here and try some of the amazing whiskies that we have in our portfolio.
Okay, fantastic. And we happen to have one in front of us, I can't help but notice.